Right now it is time to bring in David Tereshchuk. It's time for the Media Beat. David joins us on a Friday morning. We rebroadcast the show on Mondays after the 12 noon news and also during the weekend. David is a PBS television correspondent reporting on ethics and belief. He also has his own website, which is called themediabeat.us. And once again, we say good morning. Good morning, David.
Well, it's good to be with you, reporting in again from the media capital of the world, New York City, and talking, of course, with the ever-probing, ever-incisive Marshall Miles.
Well, there's a lot to I'll tell you what.
Where should we start? Why don't we start with my own hometown, where I'm reporting from. The news from New York City today, of course, is of a court report, very fundamental court reporting, crime blotter type of news. It's the surrender and in-court appearance in handcuffs, notably, we should say, of the Trump Organization's chief finance officer, Alan Weisselberg, on 15 felony counts, essentially amounting to cheating tax authorities of both the city of New York and the state of New York. Worth remarking upon, I think.
Yeah, it's and the whole thing is that once again, this indictment is not against Donald Trump, but there's going to be other indictments to come down. But it's
very
still
likely, yes.
But it still is a slap in the face because you can look at all the American presidents that we've had, and whether in office or out of office, not one has headed an organization that has been charged initially with something so wide-ranging and deep as basically 15 years of fraud.
Sure. These offenses allegedly committed over 15 years. And the suggestion is, of course, that it's been a pattern for the company for a lot longer. And in this case, the company itself is likely to be on trial. It's been indicted, as well as the individual, of course. Let's make a note, just notably for us broadcast journalists. It's a problem, or it's an uncertainty that doesn't occur to print journalists who just print out the chief financial officer's name, type it out, and then print it. But for us broadcasters, we have to get the pronunciation right. And here's the authoritative pronunciation note on Mr. Weisselberg. It is Weisselberg, as in wise. It's not the more tempting Weasel, which is, I know, has been occurring to many people's lips as they consider how to pronounce his name. Weasel, as in that ferret-like animal, with an unfair reputation, I suppose I should say, for deceptiveness. That is not how you say his name. It is Weisselberg. But other comparisons come to mind too, you know, Marshall. It's not just that it's the only time that a president's company has been on trial in terms of United States presidents, but it's not new in other countries. And I'd just like to draw your attention to an intriguing comparison with overseas. In South Africa, a country which, as you know, I've reported on a lot, right now, the immediate past president there, a man called Jacob Zuma, of course, is on trial for corruption in a trial about an arms deal, in fact, which involved huge kickbacks. But at the same time, he's also being investigated by a special national and non-partisan, I should say, commission, a national commission investigating a shocking event, something that South Africa could manage to arrange, even though the United States finds it hard to do in a matter like the 6th of January Capitol riot. They have a special commission looking into governmental corruption overall during Jacob Zuma's time when he held the top office. The local name in South Africa for this process of corruption is an intriguing term which is gaining currency internationally. I mean, just about in every continent. The notion of state capture, when the state apparatus is allegedly captured by private commercial interests. And in this case, Jacob Zuma has been, in a very typical way, he's a high-handed, arrogant man, a misogynist, and two, with a terrible track record of domestic abuse and involvement in rape accusations too. Does that sound familiar at all? Yeah. Well, he has refused to appear before this commission several times over, and the commission has resorted to the court system of South Africa to compel Jacob Zuma to attend, and he's even ignored that. So now, as of yesterday, he's been sentenced to 15 months prison by the highest court in the land, the Constitutional Court. Very telling instances of a mighty individual once out of office being called to account. And I draw it to your attention just for the obvious reason is that some countries do this effectively and some don't. I wonder which side of the ledger we're going to end up on. And of course we can't tell from the Trump case in the New York courts, because it has certainly been left after this day of indictments and a not guilty pleading. We should stress that both the company and the individual are pleading not guilty to these charges, but it is somewhat open-ended in terms of what the Manhattan DA has been making very clear, that the investigation is ongoing, and that one particular element in the indictment is particularly invites speculation at the very least, in that it makes it clear that one of the things still open-ended and still possibly open to more indictments is the direct relationship between Mr. Weisselberg himself and Mr. Donald J. Trump himself. So we'll need to watch this space very carefully.
What's interesting is there's an unindicted co-conspirator in this case, and that happens to be the controller of the Trump Organization, Jeff McConney. And some people are speculating he's an unindicted co-conspirator because he might be working with the government. That's an interesting side case, which I didn't hear reported much yesterday. But I find
that's right, and it fits with the general picture of the prosecutors potentially at least attempting to do what in the trade, and of course we all know this from crime dramatizations too, the prosecutorial practice of flipping people involved in crimes onto the prosecution side, and even charging someone like the chief financial officer with 15 felony counts could be seen as could be seen as one of two things. One, that they have failed to flip the chief financial officer onto the prosecution's side into cooperating with the prosecution, or it's a matter of them not having been able to flip him yet, and it's an instance of creating more pressure upon him in order to make him finally flip, and that's still an open possibility, of course.
It's interesting to see on another point. With Nancy Pelosi announcing that select committee and picking a Republican to be on it, it looks like Republicans don't want to participate in this at all, and nobody wants to take up the assignment of joining this committee. This is how separated we have the Congress of the United States.
Polarization striking again, yes. As I say, South Africa can get it together to form a national and non-partisan commission under, in their case, a very senior judge to investigate their problems with the immediate past president, But in our case, it's clearly impossible for a independent national commission to be formed, and so Nancy Pelosi, as the leader of the House, is resorting to this purely congressional effort, and purely, of course, one chamber of Congress, the House of Representatives only, and not the Senate. No such effort is ever likely to succeed in the Senate, but here she is working a one-sided operation in essence, although she cannily, I think, has appointed one Republican, Liz Cheney, who is already on record as being as blaming Trump for the 6th of January riot. But whether the Republican side, Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House, is going to cooperate in any degree at all is extremely doubtful now. So we may end up with a very lopsided commission in terms of political party affiliation, which is regrettable. But perhaps they can still get ahead and do the work of eliciting the facts as a whole.
It just sets the stage in Washington, which is just people. You just have to shake your head. I want to move on to yesterday, and Joe Biden doing what Joe Biden does best, and that is going to Florida after, so he didn't get in the way, but then spending over 3.5 hours with the family members that showed up and speaking with each and every one of them at that meeting. This is where the commander-in-chief truly has to be a consoler-in-chief, and this is a part of the job that Joe Biden excels at.
Yes, some time ago, the press came up with the sobriquet consoler-in-chief for such events, horrible disasters, in which the president does perform that role, representing the nation in expressing sympathy and support for the survivors of disasters and those who have lost family members and other loved ones in some terrible crisis. And as you say, he's made a practice of demonstrating that he is well suited to this role. Always has been, ever since his own life. Journalists are constantly reminding us went through terrible passages of loss. Losing his first wife and children in a car crash, and then, of course, losing his adult son to cancer. And was one of the surviving sons of that crash. And yes, he and Dr. Jill Biden, his wife, spent all that time yesterday doing what is a difficult task, but one that they do seem, but all the evidence does show that they are well suited, as you say, to it. But at the same time, he was also using that particular set of exchanges with the family members to state the obvious, I suppose, but the hard to face up to notion that yes, there are 18 examples of human remains found now for residents who've been killed in that terrible collapse. But the likelihood of any more being found, and found, certainly the ever fainter and fainter possibility that anyone will be alive is even less remote now. And that was a reality that he was able to, in a sense, underscore by talking with the families. He told the press afterwards that was a reality that the families themselves were facing up to now. And I suppose it's a delicate thing to say out loud and to make clear, but he's taking it face on. And it was striking and impressive to see him do that. And also, he was he was careful to not apportion any blame, but he was certainly very clear in saying that we do have to find out how this happened. Last week, you and I were talking about early indications that there is a background of dereliction of public duty and private ownership duty too, perhaps in the case of the condominium association that owned this building and the local authorities that were in charge of building regulations that it appears not to have been fully covered by, at least the 40-year regulation that a 40-year-old building should be examined closely was not quite fully enacted because the process hadn't set in fully, and in a sense it looks as if it's just it is turned out to be just too late, so tragically. But Biden was underlining, I think, the fact that we do have to get to the bottom of this terrible disaster, the causes for it, and he was also alluding to one reality which is kind of unproven, but I think probably resides in the area of extreme probability, that even climate change would have played its part. The extreme weather that is associated with climate change has evidently had a bad, literally corrosive effect on the building structure, and that may have played its part in getting to the point where a trigger effect happens and the whole thing comes, or at least a very large part of the entire building comes crashing down.
Another interesting point was, and this is where Joe Biden does excel. He and a potential opponent of his, DeSantis, the governor of Florida, sat down and did exactly what they had to do. They said the right things to make people in Florida, the people from that survivors of that building, and the people across the country come together at this moment, and that's just a major political thing that presidents and governors have to do. And once again, I think Joe Biden did a good job with DeSantis on this.
Sure, both of them did.
Yeah.
Let's be fair, and it comes under the heading that I referred to last week, and I use perhaps a little too easily sometimes, but ODC, the ordinary OCD rather, ordinary common decency. And we put, at such moments as this, we put our party differences behind us and separate them out entirely from the main job at hand, which is to sympathize, make things as good as we possibly can for the people affected, and of course get to the bottom of the truth behind the terrible disaster. It's a political no-brainer, you would think, but it has to be remarked upon when it happens, because, as you were saying earlier, it happens so rarely these days when we can put our partisan differences to one side.
And the final blow for this is going to be the news broke last night and early this morning that the pile beneath them was shifting, and that the building that is remaining is unsafe, and they're going to have to bring that down before they resume the search for more bodies, and that will
terrible
be a
moment when it was suspected that the damage to the surviving structure was putting everything at risk, and the whole search and rescue effort, heart-wrenching as it is anyway, had to be suspended. Now it's working again, but there is this terrible suggestion that the rest of the building may not be as stable as we initially thought.
All right, I want to go to, in our last 5 to 10 minutes, a big story, international story. One of them is that if there's a name that's familiar with Americans, the Bagram Air Base is one of them, and we have officially all the foreign forces are gone from which basically was the centerpiece of that war for so many years.
Sure. The Forever War, one of the two Forever Wars perhaps, is finally coming to an end, at least for Americans. We have to say this is a decidedly self-centered piece of policy enactment, but it's been after, despite all the presidents who have tried to grapple with this problem, it is Biden who finally gets troop withdrawal completed out of Afghanistan, and we will see whether it truly is the end of American involvement. Clearly, American involvement will continue in strictly speaking, non-military form, at least in the form of military boots on the ground. We may withdraw all our soldiers, but there are, of course, many elements of American support remaining behind, and certainly an awful lot of American tax dollars being spent on the maintenance, the survival of the government that we leave for the moment intact in Afghanistan, government by Afghanis of their own country. But what hovers as a very ominous question mark above it all is how prepared is that government and how able is that government to fend off the blatantly rising and increasingly aggressive Taliban efforts to, of course, overthrow that government. That's their intention, and the danger is that they might press it forward and even succeed. The efforts that the Americans will be trying to do at a distance now, unless we find ourselves in the situation of having from Pacific Ocean positions to send sorties back in to sort individual battles and encounters out in some kind of decisive intervention. That may still have to happen. So I wouldn't, we shouldn't put too big a black period at the end of this sentence. It may go on in some senses, in some fashion. But for now, yes, it's the end of the forever war in its most obvious form.
Now, I'm going to ask you to take me to school for a bit here. I have a question. There were by-elections in England, and Labour is claiming a victory in that. Are there by-elections kind of like our off elections, or?
It's a district election, purely local, and it elects a member of Parliament, one of the 400 or so members of Parliament who sit in the House of Commons in Westminster. So it's significant. In this particular case, the town of Batley in Yorkshire has always been, or pretty well always, has been a safe Labour seat, and it was held by a very much loved Labour representative, a member of Parliament, an MP who was assassinated by a man who shouted a slogan when he shot her, rather redolent of what was going on. This was 2016. The assassination was accompanied by this cry that was somewhat redolent of an American slogan. The Trump campaign's "America First" was echoed by this British shooter who shouted "Britain First" in killing the member of Parliament. And it's her sister who has now won the seat for now. The intervening member who held it for Labour's interest was at risk of losing it, at least when the by-election came up again. It looked as if Labour might actually lose this long-standing and traditional Labour seat, and it was only a few hundred votes by which the former member's sister managed to reclaim it. I'll hold on to it, I should say. It's in some ways the Labour Party are well, in one very clear way, the Labour Party is heaving a great sigh of relief that they have held on to it. but it's a terrible warning to them that such a one-time safe seat came very close to being lost. And of course, it's a measure of the state of the Labour Party in Great Britain, even though the Conservative Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is held to be by 50%, according to public opinion polls. 50% of the British public say he's not to be trusted. Nonetheless, the Labour Party finds it difficult to hold on to one of its safest seats in one of the one-time safest areas for it in the country. It's a bracing message to the Labour Party to get themselves in better order if they ever want to replace Boris Johnson.
All right, and finally, let's go to the Supreme Court decisions yesterday. The major ones by a 6-3 conservative majority concerning voting rights. And you know, this court is going to, the conservatives on the court are going to band together on certain things. It's going to be very interesting to see how this will play out over the next 3 years with Joe Biden in office and what happens.
I think you're right. The court reporters for the Supreme Court will be bringing us news, I think, of a decided conservative push on the court on certain issues, and abortion may well be one of them, but voting rights is certainly already demonstrated to be one. We have in this case the Voting Rights Act of 1965 quite clearly damaged. The president himself has used that very word himself to say that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is badly damaged by this judgment. It's certainly being delivered. You know, a series two makes a series, I guess, of pretty damaging blows to that Rights Act, and now we will see in this judgment, which effectively finds against the appeal by the Democratic National Committee, and tilts the balance considerably against any fight to stop Republican efforts nationwide in legislatures up and down the country to limit, or even Democrats would claim, suppress voting rights, the kind of actions that are being considered and enacted in many state houses by Republican majorities there. So I think we can look out, we can expect, and we'll see judgments going very much against the Democrats, because once upon a time the voting rights issue was a nonpartisan one too, and Republicans would wholeheartedly back measures to strengthen the Voting Rights Act since 1965. That is no longer the case, and I think some journalists have been saying quite straightforwardly that it is the direct effect of the Republican Party coming to rely so much now upon white voters. It's a sad commentary in our times, if that's the truth.
Well, we'll have to follow this and see. The Democrats really are going to have to put a major push on to gain a few more seats in the Congress and a few more seats in the Senate in the off-year election. But we'll see what they can do.
We will indeed.
David, always great to speak to you. We'll have a good weekend, 4th of July, and we'll speak to you next week.
See you next week.
David Tereshchuk with the Media Beat here on Robin Hood Radio. Of course, you can find his website, themediabeat.us.